Thanks for joining me again for another Pixie Talks review vlog.
Pixie Talks, reviews and vlogs at Pixie Talks. Pixie Talks, reviews and vlogs at Pixie Talks.
Woo! Happy Halloween! As usual, October has been a blast, leading up to a grand finale of spooky goodness. And this year, I have a very special Halloween video to do, another top 5 list. It's been rather evident on this channel that I am a huge fan of the vampire genre, but also that I am rather picky about my vampire stories. I'm not the hugest fan of good guy broody vampires, and I certainly don't want my vampires to sparkle. And so this week, to wrap up October, these are my top 5 favorite vampire films. And you may have guessed by now that the t-shirt design I've been promoting all month was a teaser for this very video. Please consider checking it out and supporting the channel. It would mean an awful lot to me. Alright, let's do this. First up is Dracula. Ah, Dracula, the granddaddy of all vampire stories. Bram Stoker's novel is one of my favorites. It's paced beautifully, it weaves a subtle kind of mystery and suspense that creeps up on the reader bit by bit until it pits its characters against arguably the #1 baddie of all fiction. The story of Dracula is a story of suspense and the allure of the macabre, and encompasses everything that I feel like a vampire story should be. Dracula isn't scary in the monstrous sense. He's not all teeth and claws coming at you quickly. In fact, there's very little action in this movie at all. No big epic battles against a creature that could rip your throat out. No, Dracula is scary in a more subtle, conceptual sense. Dracula is made scary by how alluring he is. He seduces and attracts. He can brainwash and manipulate. In essence, he represents our fear of our own darker impulses and desires and the fear that we may give in to them. Dracula makes us afraid not of monsters, but of ourselves, and that's the subtlety that makes the Dracula tale brilliant. Now, there have been so many different adaptations of Dracula that it seems hard to pick a favorite film, but I am very much in love with the 1931 version of the story for a number of reasons. Firstly, it has the best pacing and atmosphere. It matches the book's drawn-out sense of mystery very well, allowing the audience to be sucked in. I also prefer the acting in this one, and as Bela Lugosi's legendary performance is still a cultural icon, I'd say I have good reason. And try as I might, I really cannot tell why the 1992 version is as beloved as it is, because, guys, it's terrible. It really, really is. It's over the top, lacks any kind of subtlety, and the acting is absolutely atrocious. It may be more technically accurate to the book, but it loses the core of the book's nature, which is the graver insult to me. Next up, we have El Vampiro. Literally translated as The Vampire, El Vampiro is a 1957 Mexican vampire film. In general, I really love the black and white era for vampire films because I think that they really understood the genre in a way that we have mostly lost nowadays. El Vampiro was another such tale of seduction and repulsion, of mystery and suspense. And although it is not the masterpiece that Dracula is, it runs in the same vein and manages to thoroughly engross. While 1931 Dracula is fantastic, it can often be a little on the slower side. But El Vampiro was, in my opinion, a little bit more evenly paced. A young girl returns home in order to care for her sick aunt, only to discover upon arrival that her aunt has already passed away, and the cause of death may be about to strike again. It's a well-drawn-out, suspenseful piece that kept me well engaged and eager to see what happened next. It also does a tremendous job of getting you invested in its characters. All of them have brilliantly displayed personalities and passions, and you end up really wanting to follow their stories. It hits a lot of the same notes as the Dracula tale, while also feeling a little bit more refreshingly down to earth. Great dialogue and banter keep the story feeling realistic and intriguing. The only really glaring fault that it may have is a bit of a Dracula rehash for its master vamp, but he plays the part so well that I didn't even really mind. This is a great classic vampire movie that, while perhaps not as thoughtful and philosophical as Dracula, is a tad more fun. Next up, Fright Night.
Fright Night. if you love being scared.
Fright Night is quite possibly hands down my favorite vampire movie ever. It hits every single menacing note that I want from my vampire movies. Intrigue, a building mystery, cat and mouse games, the allure of the macabre, and a darn scary vampire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Fright Night is about a teenage boy who finds himself living next door to a vampire when a mysterious stranger moves into the neighborhood. Jerry is suave and smooth-talking, but with his arrival also come a series of strange disappearances. And it's up to Charlie to defeat him before the entire town is overrun with the undead. Now, this movie is from 1985, but also had a remake in 2011. And honestly, they are both superb films, and in fact, have to tie here. While the original is more true to traditional vampire folklore, the remake is witty and slick and has a better cat and mouse dynamic between the vampire and Charlie. I don't really want to compare and contrast them too much though, since that could be an entire video in and of itself, so I'll try to focus this overview on the story, of which the remake was rather faithful. Fright Night excels at atmosphere. We discover the danger and the sinister pace by pace with Charlie, and we are well invested in saving the city from the vampire by the time the vampire is fully revealed. Jerry is also an excellent antagonist, every bit as subtly menacing as I could want, but when he goes full vamp, he is all teeth and terror. The story keeps you at the edge of your seat, and while the original had somewhat hokey special effects, it still manages to be a great freak-out. I love this one. It delivers a stunningly chilling vampire story with memorable characters and an intense final showdown between vampire and vampire hunter, which is an excellent segue into the next title, Salem's Lot. It should be no surprise that a Stephen King title made this list. He is a master at slowly unraveling a sinister mystery and keeping his audience guessing, so it makes sense that Salem's Lot would appear here. It is also a classic thematically, although the 1997 movie does not go into near as much detail as the novel. Unlike with Fright Night, however, the remake was not worth the bother, having half bored me to tears. The original film, however, is a masterful piece of work atmospherically, building its characters and complexity as it meanders through life in a small town. What's interesting to me about this particular vampire story is that the vampires themselves are not the baddies, not really. It's the people living in Salem's Lot, with their underhanded dealings and their skeletons in the closet, that make for the real horror, rendering the vampires almost incidental to the true horror lurking within humanity's heart. That said, the vampires themselves are scary as heck here as well, and it's not often that the traditional vampire scratching at the window to be let in scene is played so beautifully and with so much tension. It's a gripping tale that merges slice of life with haunted house and monster horror, and it is incredible. The acting really does me in too. Each character is brilliantly performed. Although I have to say that one of the best scenes in the entire film is when an unfaithful wife is caught in the act by her vengeful husband. I get chills watching that performance. The one thing that I would criticize harshly about it, however, is the main vampire himself, Barlow. Whereas in the novel, he is an actual character, menacing and evil, with dialogue and purpose. In the 1979 film, he is little more than a mindless zombie kind of creature. As such, he ends up being kind of more of a plot device than an actual character, which ends up robbing the story of some of the depth from the book. Unfortunately, while the remake did try to remedy that, it failed at pretty much everything else. Lastly, Guillermo del Toro's The Strain. Now, I know I'm cheating here with this one, since this isn't a movie, it is a TV series. But, I mean, Salem's Lot was aired in 2 parts as a TV miniseries, so maybe it's not that much of a stretch? The Strain is a novel series by filmmaker Guillermo del Toro and his friend Chuck Hogan, and the adapted TV series is absolutely breathtaking. Del Toro is my favorite director, as you probably noticed from my fangirl meltdown on Crimson Peak last week, so it should come as no surprise that a Del Toro title would be on this list. These are some of the most unique and terrifying vampires I have ever seen. Instead of growing fangs, these beasties become a weird sort of insectoid hybrid, complete with a hidden secondary mouth a la Alien. And it is absolutely scary. The story follows a doctor who's trying to figure out what this new virus plaguing his city is, as he's joined by a team of others eventually finding themselves fighting off the vampire infestation. What is fascinating about the strain is that it starts off as more or less a typical drama with some mystery elements, and focuses a lot on the characters' personal lives and struggles before the monsters begin to surface. But when they do, all hell breaks loose and their private lives are put on hold as they struggle to survive and save each other. Much like Salem's Lot, it is very much about humanity at its core and the evils and corruption that are already present. The vampire scourge presented as an ancient evil that has only been biding its time, waiting for an opening to take advantage of. The story allows its characters to struggle with themselves on a very personal and intimate level, while also struggling against the hordes of bloodsuckers. And as an interesting aside, it's also very interesting if you compare this series to Del Toro's first film, Kronos, which also dealt with vampirism. There are an awful lot of similarities, from the weird insectoid take on vampirism to the rich old guy obsessed with immortality. Kronos strikes me as sort of his prototype, which became more polished in The Strain. And there you have it! My complete list of what I consider to be some of the best bloodsuckers that the genre has to offer. And they are also the vamps featured on my Halloween t-shirt design on Redbubble. And that wraps up Halloween month, so things will go back to normal for now. Until Christmas? Oops, I didn't say that. See you next week. Bye!